Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chatting with Charlie, EB5 Investor Outlook for February 2025. My name is Joey Barnett. I am a partner at WR Immigration. Thank you for joining us today. We are back to a live show here through Zoom, which is very exciting. We're also going to be uploading this onto YouTube. So if you're listening on YouTube, thanks for watching. And please subscribe. Isn't that what you're supposed to say? So please subscribe and listen to all the great things WR Immigration has to say. There's a lot of updates and news going on right now. We're getting questions every day. What does this Trump immigration policy mean? What does that executive order mean for EB5, for H-1B? And so please sign up for our newsletter or follow us on YouTube so that you stay on top of it. And today's call is about EB5. It is wonderful to be here with Charlie Oppenheim, who used to work for this Department of State. He is now the director of Visa Consulting at WR Immigration. Great to see you, Charlie.
It's great to be here today.
And Charlie and I have done this now for, I think, 2 years, and this is the first one that we are doing in 2025. A lot has actually come out in the world of EB5 over the past couple of months in the Visa Bulletin, and so we're excited to talk about that. And of course, this doesn't constitute legal advice. It's just for information purposes. And please feel free to reach out. visalaw@wolfsdorf.com is our general email for the firm. You can also always reach me at jbarnett@wolfsdorf.com. And we'd be happy to help you guide you through EB5. And we are journeying forward again during a Trump administration, which is going to make things a little bit more difficult for immigrants. But we have the top immigration attorneys, and we were just voted as top EB5 attorneys again, which is very cool. And our managing partner is a top 5 EB5 all-star, or I like to call it the old guys award. Sorry, Bernie. All right, so let's get to it. Here's the roadmap for today. The first thing that I want to talk about before we really dive into EB5 is because we keep hearing about, well, what's going to change under Trump? And, we have someone here, Charlie, who worked in the Department of State during Trump 1.0. And so it's going to be interesting to get his thoughts on what changed, what didn't change. And Charlie, I mean, you worked, maybe just give us a little bit of background about how long you were at the Department of State, and in your position of writing the Visa Bulletin, and what did you see when administrations changed in your position?
Sure. I was chief of the Immigrant Visa Control and Reporting Division at the U.S. Department of State for over 23 years. The decisions I made resulted in over 9 million applicants getting issued an immigrant visa or getting their green card. I worked closely with all the White House administrations, congressional staff, et cetera, to inform them on the numerical control process, especially when they were looking at any type of immigration reform issues, or if they were going to try to tweak something. They would let me know and others what they were planning, and then we could tell them, what impact that would have. We published the Visa Bulletin on a monthly basis to show what visa availability would be in the upcoming month, and also try to include in that Visa Bulletin any information we saw on upcoming visa availability issues, because we felt it was very important to keep people well informed so they could make the best decisions and know what was going on.
And so, just generally, I mean, and we were talking about this beforehand. I mean, did you see lots of changes at the Visa office where you were working in the DC area the last time Mr. Trump was elected?
No, in terms of the numerical control process, I didn't see a lot of changes. We got requests for statistical data, but this chart shows that basically 2016 is the year before the Trump administration. You can see the annual limit and actual number use is almost perfect. And you also see during the Trump administration, 2017 through 2020, the annual limits and actual number use correspond very closely. The only difference is really in fiscal 20 or calendar year 2020, and we felt the impact of the COVID, which had nothing to do with the Trump administration in terms of how many numbers could be used. So again, past performance is no guarantee of what will happen in the future, but I don't believe that anybody should be very overly concerned about the numerical control, the amount of numbers available, in large part because the Immigration and Nationality Act specifies how many numbers can be used in the various categories and how the annual limits are determined. So it would require congressional action to change how the State Department determines the numbers reflecting, say, in these annual limits, how they made that determination. So again, I wouldn't be overly concerned, at least at this point.
Well, that's really good to hear. And I thought this was important to share because when I saw it, I was surprised and not necessarily what I had expected, just based on the immigration conversations that we have around Trump and his policies. And I thought it was just a good pieces of data that we would want to share. And I get questions. Oh, go ahead.
And one other thing, it's important to realize that much, if not all, of the Trump empire is pretty much based on business-related endeavors. So hopefully that bodes well for the EB-5 community and the employment-based categories as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I keep hearing, well, how is Trump going to impact EB-5? And my thought, and I guess what I can see just from the first couple of days of his office, is, EB-5 is not in the crosshairs of Trump's immigration policy and the reforms that he wants to make. He's going more after family-based immigration, humanitarian-based immigration, low-wage employment immigration, fraud and enforcement, and, really ramping up deportation proceedings. And so EB-5 is a job-creating foreign direct investment program, and that's exactly what the country needs. It's exactly what he is looking for. So I don't really foresee too much negative impact on EB-5, just like last time there wasn't any. I do expect there to be some slowdowns potentially on processing of EAD and advanced parole cards, maybe scheduling of interviews. We may be seeing increased background checks and making sure that, applications are consistent with prior DS-160s or prior H-1 applications, things like that. But that's the kind of normal stuff that we'd be looking out for anyway. So let's get into what we're seeing nowadays. Well, thank you, Charlie, for that background. I just thought it was important with the new year to give us some background on that. Let's look at the Visa Bulletin for this upcoming month, February 2025. This is the chart A. As always, we have broken it out for the 4 EB-5 categories for the purpose of this webinar. And Charlie, what are we looking at here? What do you see? What's the opportunity available for people right now?
Well, as you notice, you mentioned the pre-RIA, that is the top line, unreserved. It's current for most countries. China has a final action date listed, as does India, and the date listed is the priority date of the first applicant who could not be accommodated for final action on their case, resulting either in visa issuance or adjustment of status on their case. I would not.
Meaning, sorry, just in plain English, meaning a visa is not available for that person who's filing on
a visa is not available.
Correct.
And I would not expect those two dates to change until later in the year. There's sufficient demand probably within those dates, and the State Department could move those dates later in the year and have no problem of maximizing number use. The key issue is on the 3 set-asides, the rural, the high unemployment, and infrastructure. You will see that a C is listed across the board for everybody. That means that C reflects current, meaning numbers are immediately available for any reserved category applicant who has an approved petition. I believe that these categories will stay current for the foreseeable future. And the current means that if somebody is in the US, they can file for adjustment at this time, and you can do a much better job explaining the benefits of that process.
Right. Right. So because it's current and a visa is available, it gives people who are in the United States the ability to file for an adjustment when you file for the EB-5 petition. So we call that concurrent adjustment. You're doing it concurrently at the same time. And when you file for that adjustment of status, you're also able to file for an EAD, an employment authorization document, and for an advanced parole, which allows you to travel. Those are interim benefits that you have during the time in which your adjustment of status is pending. And so for your adjustment of status to be approved, your I-526 needs to be approved, and there needs to be a visa available at that time for USCIS to adjudicate the adjustment. So right now, the benefit and the opportunity is to file your EB-5 and get your spot in line and file the adjustment along with it and provide yourself with a backup plan. And this is what I'm seeing every single day. Many times a day, I'm talking with potential EB-5 investors who are in the United States on H-1B, stuck in a visa backlog. You know, they have an EB-2 priority date sometime in 2018 or potentially later. And we're looking at really long backlogs in those visa categories for that country. And they're looking at EB-5 as an alternative. And what I'm telling people and what I want to discuss with you, Charlie, is like that opportunity and this C that we see in the Visa Bulletin is not going to last forever. And so the question is, well, when is there going to be a final action date for these set-asides for India and for China? And that's a question that there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of data that we don't have and a lot of assumptions that we have to kind of go through. And you can build models and come up with ranges. But I think, and Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, is like, you know, by this time next year, we will likely see a final action date, and potentially much earlier than that, because we're going to see more USCIS approvals, and we are going to start seeing a decrease in the supply of visas available. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do. And as you mentioned, it's very important. These dates reflect the status for the month of February. It is the Visa Bulletin dates at the time of final action on your case, which will dictate whether your case can be finalized. But again, if you, as Joey mentioned, it is very important to act in a timely manner. If you're able to file and get the concurrent filing benefits, it doesn't matter what happens to the dates in the future. You've kind of locked your place in and gotten those benefits, even if a date is imposed at a later period.
Right. And importantly, when a final action date is imposed later and you are stuck in a backlog, you can extend your EAD and your advanced parole indefinitely because your adjustment of status remains pending. So you can continue to remain here until your visa number is available, and then they approve your adjustment, and that's when you start the conditional green card status. The other big change in EB-5, which is well served with this opportunity, is that the new EB-5 law is written in a way in that your ability to get your money back without it impacting your immigration process is no longer tied to when your conditional green card status begins, and that is tied to when a visa is available. So for pre-RIA investors, who are stuck in backlogs, their money has to remain invested for much longer than someone who is filing today. And that is changing the calculus on investment decisions. Hey, do I want to go rural? Hey, do I want to go in high unemployment? Some people may be more willing to sit in longer backlogs in high unemployment that have half as many visa numbers as rural because they feel like it's a more financially secure EB5 investment. I have a number of clients who are doing that. I also have a number of clients who are going in the rural because of the immigration benefits associated with priority processing and double the number of visa numbers. So everyone kind of is making their own calculation and balancing out, those different considerations when they're looking at EB5 projects. All right, so this is chart A. Chart B is finally important. Well, sort of. Chart B, what is chart B? Can you tell me what chart B is, Charlie? Maybe just a general background.
Sure. The chart A, which we just saw, reflects visa availability in the upcoming month. The chart B indicates where the dates are likely to be in probably 8 to 12 months. And the chart B is used to allow applicants to begin filing early, and so that their case can be adjudicated and worked on in advance, so that 8 months down the road, their case is ready for final action at that time, instead of them only being able to begin the process at that time. This is a very efficient process. It began in October of 2015, and it provided me with much greater ability to forecast visa availability in the future. And during my tenure, it greatly reduced volatility in the final action dates, because instead of having to make an estimate of how much demand would be coming in if the date moved a month, a week, or whatever, we had a good idea actually what demand was actually out there ready to be processed if we did move the dates. So again, these dates early in the year, they can be used for the adjustment of status filing. The USCIS makes a determination when they'll allow the Chart B dates to be used. They have recently announced that effective February, these dates can no longer be used, and only the Chart A dates can be used. But for EB5 applicants, reserved applicants, this has absolutely no impact on them. The fact that the Immigration Service has changed this Chart B to Chart A designation.
Right. So for potentially for other employment-based filings, it matters.
It would matter. It just doesn't matter for the employment fifth preference reserved categories, which are all listed in both Chart A and Chart B as current.
Exactly. And so we didn't have our Chatting with Charlie EB5 last month, but we did a webinar, and I wanted to draw everyone's attention to this because it was a footnote in the January Visa Bulletin saying, hey, we're getting enough approvals coming in from USCIS that we actually may need to see a final action date by the end of this fiscal year, to ensure that the visa numbers don't exceed the annual limits. So can you tell me, how do you square that away with the C's that we see in Chart B? And I guess what do you think is sort of the point of this footnote, and what do you expect to happen in the next, I don't know, 8 months or so?
Yeah. As I mentioned, one of the purposes of the monthly Visa Bulletin is to provide information on what may happen months down the road. And I think that the State Department was very wise in taking this opportunity in the January Visa Bulletin to announce they know that they have X amount of petitions have been filed, so they can view that in relation to the amount of visa numbers which they deem will be available this year and in coming years. They also see, as you mentioned, that the amount of approvals is increasing. So they wanted to let people know that they're monitoring the situation, and it's at some point in the future, final action dates will need to be imposed. But I think this is strictly a kind of a warning shot. I don't think anybody should be overly concerned at this point, but I would advise people to continue to monitor the items that of this type in the Visa Bulletin in potentially in coming months. There was nothing mentioned whatsoever on any categories for the month of in the February Visa Bulletin. Again, I think this was just to get the word out early so people could be planning for far in the future.
Thank you. And would you expect there to be another footnote like this maybe a month or so before the actual imposition of a final action date? Or I think this
when I was chief of the office, I always tried to make an announcement whenever possible, at least 1 to 2 months before I thought a corrective action would be required. So yes, I do believe that they will try at least a month before a date would be imposed to put something in the Visa Bulletin. That cannot be guaranteed if there was a sudden dramatic change. But I think right now that the amount of cases being processed, both final action and approvals, I think it's low enough that this is an issue that is further down the road, and it's not something that needs to be concerned about it in the immediate future, but it definitely will happen for fiscal 2026.
right. So, I mean, we say immediate future. I'm thinking about people and clients who are planning and the financial moves that they need to make in order to get EB5 ready. And it can go pretty quickly once funds are liquid. But I do think that people who are thinking about wanting to do EB5 should be having those discussions now, because it can take a little bit of time. Even if you're getting a home equity line of credit on your home, you have to get the appraisal done. That it takes time sometimes for things to move. And it is very clear that we are going to see a final action date in EB5. And I'm pretty much telling every potential EB5 investor who was born in India or China at this point that, yeah, you can file now and it's current, and you can file your adjustment, and you can remain in the United States, and you can work wherever you want because you have your EAD. But I think there's going to be a backlog at the time that your I-526E is approved. If you file now, it's going to take, 10 months, 12 months, 16 months? By that point, there will be a lot more approvals by USCIS that will cause the demand to exceed the supply. And so you want to get your spot in the line, and you do that by making the investment and by filing your I-526. So the two takeaways from here that we want to talk about is, first, the one that Charlie already mentioned. It doesn't matter chart A or chart B for EB5 for the reserved or set aside preferences. And when we're just looking at the numbers of supply and how many approvals there would need to be, it looks like there's going to need to be over 1,400 rural petitions approved, and over half of that is approved in high unemployment for the demand to exceed the supply. And based on the data that we have, which is obtained by a FOIA through IIUSA and Brandon Meyer, excuse me, is as through June 2024, there was less than, I say 478 rural approvals and 240 high unemployment area approvals. So a quarter of what would need there to be this fiscal year in order for a final action date to be imposed. I don't know. I mean, it's really tough to say how quickly it goes through, and when May to September. Wow, that's a 5-month difference. How could it be so different? I mean, Charlie, can you kind of give us a thought of all the different factors of what we know and may not know on why it's such a big range?
Sure. Whenever I've done predictions when I was chief of the at the State Department or now, I tried to give, in a worst case scenario, and that's the current through May. May is my or a date being imposed for June would be the very worst case. I just don't believe that based on the data we have available now, and we have to rely on the only available data, I don't believe that there's going to be enough petitions to require the imposition of a date. And it's important to remember that a final action date should only be imposed when number use through that time plus expected number use in the remaining months of the fiscal year will exceed the annual limit. And again, I, you know, it also, so I just don't think that there's going to be enough approved petitions to maximize number use this year. If they did something happened, they may hold off until August or September to impose a date. But I really would expect it to be, current through September. And again, it's important to remember the fact that my petition is approved. Well, that's great. But then other processing has to take place on my case. If I'm processing overseas, I have to be scheduled for a visa interview. If I'm being processed at USCIS, they're having to adjudicate my case. So the mere fact that my petition is approved, say next month, it may be months down the road before that could result in me requiring the use of a number. So again, that is why I am fairly confident that numbers will remain current through the fiscal year, which ends in September, but definitely not before May. And we'll update, as hopefully more information will become available to us. It would be great if the Immigration Service and state were publishing more data on this issue so that people could make better informed decisions. But again, we will just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking right before this started about some of the things that the Department of State hasn't provided, which they normally would have, like the annual report, for example, showing the full amount of fiscal year 2024 use, like including how many adjustments were adjudicated. We don't have that still. Like that would be important data to have, right? Because that'll show more cases that have been cleared out the backlog. That's less demand for the supply now.
Correct. And the State Department also publishes number use for immigrant visas by visa category and country of chargeability. They publish that on a monthly basis, but the only data that they have posted for fiscal 2025 is the October number use data. And looking at reserved number use in that period, there's virtually nothing. So if they were posting that data, it would allow us to start looking and seeing, yes, more reserve numbers are beginning to be used overseas. They also publish an annual report of the visa office, as you mentioned. We'll see if anything was done last year. There is also a report, the National Visa Center waiting list as of November 1st of 2024. They should be posting that any time now. It's a shame it wasn't posted already, but that report will indicate how many reserved applicants have petitions on file for processing overseas. And that will be a very exciting report to look at and see what State Department has.
Because that will show like the pent-up demand, so to speak.
Yeah, that will show the amount of applicants who could potentially be scheduled for interview at an overseas office. So that'll be very useful to look at. And they have posted this chart on their website, and they have estimated 150,000 which is exactly what I've been predicting probably for the last 6 to 8 months. So I'm very happy that my predictions are matching what they're saying at this time. But again, I think that this 150 is a good benchmark for everybody to be looking at in terms of visa availability this year.
And to break this chart down even more, EB5 gets 7.1% of the worldwide annual limit. So that's where that 10,650 comes from. And then the set-asides get 32% of that number, and the unreserved gets the remaining 68%. So that's what this worldwide is in the far right column, and then the middle column is on a foreign state or per country 7% basis. This is what it is. And the reason why I wanted to show you this was they very specifically said with that first star, employment chart does not include numbers carried over from the previous fiscal years in the EB5 category. So they're explicitly referencing the carryover provisions in the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act. And when you do carry them over, this is what we got. And so the orange is what the Department of State said. The blue is when you add the carryover. And you can see the total number for this fiscal year is over 18,000, with over 7,100 available for the set-asides. Of that 7,100 set-asides, 62.5% of those go to rural. Half that number goes to high unemployment, and a tenth of that number goes to infrastructure. So that's how it's broken down. And I just thought it was important to see that the per country limit is more than what it indicated in that form. That means that that's very good to see for Indians and for Chinese who are wondering when a final action date may be imposed. But Charlie, and I know we have a slide on this, and I said, we'll just hold off on it, but I still got to bring it up. Can you explain the legal concept behind why a country may get more than 7% of a EB category's number use in a certain year? I mean, that's possible, right? Isn't that what happened in China for EB5 forever?
Yeah, and it's been happening for all the employment categories for a number of years. And what Congress decided is they said they did not, although they want to impose the 7% per country limit on countries, and that limit is to prevent a handful of countries from monopolizing use of the vast majority of the numbers. But they also wanted to say, okay, if the annual limit is not going to be used, we don't want to waste those numbers. So we will allow applicants or countries that have reached their limit to use those extra numbers. And just to give you an example, say if the annual limit were 1,000 and China and India were deemed to be using a total of 300, and the rest and all other countries were estimated to use an additional 300, then there would be, under the 1,000 annual limit, the State Department would see, okay, we have potentially 400 wasted numbers. So therefore, the State Department would start allowing those 400 otherwise unused numbers to be given to applicants from China and India strictly in priority date order. So this is a very good thing. It is benefited in the pre-RIA years. It has greatly benefited China for a number of years, and it will allow probably China and India, once dates are established, potentially allow them to use numbers far in excess of their normal per country limit. And one other point on this carryover, this is unique to the employment reserved categories. This is a huge benefit along with the concurrent filing. This is a benefit that is not available to any other applicants in either the family sponsored categories or any of the other employment categories. So any unused reserve numbers from last year is here you're showing get carried over. Again, that is not a benefit that's available to any other categories. And again, why applicants looking at the EB5 reserve categories need to act in a very timely manner.
Yeah, I wanted to, if possible, maybe dive a little bit deeper on what this might mean for post RIA people, like investors who are filing today, because you mentioned when we were discussing that determination of using or not wanting to waste those unused Visa numbers is based on like historical patterns and data, right?
Right.
So for EB5 and, we don't have a lot of history with these new categories. And so it's, because we don't have that sort of precedent there to rely on, what would you be doing if you were, still at Department of State and, to make sure that we are using the most number of visas?
I think what I'd be looking at is in consultation with the Immigration Service, talking to them about how many approvals they see coming through and what processing capacity they have. When I was in office, I did that, and I would also talk to our overseas post. For example, China, the cases are processed by Guangzhou. I would discuss with Guangzhou what their processing capacity is. And if I would start making the determination or try to be making estimates of how many otherwise unused reserve numbers there are going to be, I'd be looking at that very carefully now and continuing to monitor it. And I would also know, as the January Visa Bulletin note is, they know that there's enough petitions filed and they're going to see the amount of approvals coming through. So they can kind of maybe hold off before they start doing anything. If they were going to say, okay, we think they're going to be otherwise unused numbers, we can start giving them out to China and India. They can hold off on that if they need to for a period of time, knowing that there's going to be sufficient demand in those two countries to maximize number use. But again, I'm sure the State Department is already looking very carefully at this because the goal is to maximize number use in all of the categories each year. And that is basically their fiduciary responsibility to maximize number use. So again, I think that's one of the reasons why I believe things will be able to stay current for, most of the year, if not the entire year.
Well, we have started to see an uptick in consular interviews in Ho Chi Minh City and Guangzhou for post-RA investors. So I'm hoping that they start churning out these immigrant visas and using these visa numbers. I mean, that's what we need to see. But we don't really know what has happened over the past 3 months. And so would you expect that sort of the visa use to really ramp up as we get closer to the summer, like we have for the past few years?
Typically, that is the goal. The Immigration and Nationality Act says that you should be using 27% of the limit in each of the first 3 quarters. So in theory, through June, they should use 81% of the annual limit. But again, if they're seeing that they're falling far below that, the quarterly or that for the 3-quarter limit, that will allow them to keep everything current going into that 4th quarter. And again, it takes time. The applicants you mentioned that are being scheduled for interview overseas, those applicants have to be notified once they have their petition approved and it's at the National Visa Center. The National Visa Center notifies that applicant to begin assembling certain required documents and submit them to the National Visa Center. From the time that applicant submits that document to the time they would be scheduled for interview is typically 2 months in the future, even if a number is immediately available. And so that's again why I'm thinking, well, if a large amount of approvals are not being received until the spring or early summer, there is not going to be enough time for those applicants to be notified, submit their documentation, and be scheduled for interview before the end of the year.
Thank you. Super helpful. I really appreciate it. I think people who are listening probably do too. So this is this waterfall chart that we've created, and we've seen others do similar. And we just wanted to add in, before we've always put it as an estimate. Now we know it's for real because the Department of State posted it. So you can see since fiscal year 2022, the worldwide level has dropped quite significantly, and now we're kind of back to normal, potentially. And you'll see that we have in this fiscal year over the 18,000 EB5 visa numbers available. So the doors are open, and we are filing these on a daily basis. And I would say that what you should be looking for is a strong source of funds, documentation to back up to show that your money was lawfully obtained. It can come from within the United States. It can come from outside the United States. It could be multiple sources. The money can be gifted. The money can be lent. There are a lot of different ways that you can fund EB5 and make sure you get your green card, and make sure that you get your I-526E approved. But really what it comes down to with EB5, and I said this on a webinar, that we should give you a QR code. Maybe Simon will put it up here for the YouTube, but about due diligence, it really comes down to choosing a good EB5 project, making sure that you are going to get that job creation, making sure that you are going to get the money back at the end of the process so that you can live here successfully and move on with your life post EB5. And we have helped thousands of EB5 investors over decades. We have a great EB5 team. We would be pleased to help. Please reach out. We have our QR codes if you want to scan them on your phone here. VisaLaw@wolfstorf.com is our general page. Feel free to mention that you were watching Chatting with Charlie and wanted to talk with me. I'd be happy to have a consultation with you. And again, please sign up for our newsletter. We're going to be staying really on top of everything that's evolving on a fluid basis. So please stay with us. Charlie, thank you always. Appreciate everyone for listening in, and we'll talk to you next month. Take care.